Hello, Mark Konlock, Director of Horticulture, Green Bay Botanical Garden, out here getting my bulb groove on, planting some daffodils, or as I like to call them, daffodilions. I don't know why, it just sounds cool. But anyway, fall is the time to plant bulbs. If you've gotten all those beautiful catalogs out there, you've seen some things that you might like in your garden. So once we get the first frost around, beginning mid-October, that's the time to plant your bulbs. But before you do that, just one quick thing to think about is you'll probably want to clean the annuals out of your garden, perhaps, especially if they've frosted and don't look good anyway. And then the other thing to think about is when you want to clean up your perennials. Here at the garden, we've started to clean them up in the fall and cut them back kind of in conjunction with the bulb planting. So before we plant a bed, we'll cut the perennials off. It does reduce, the habitat and the winter interest, but in the springtime, it allows you to be able to get into beds and to not have to worry about getting into beds because of the wet conditions that we'll have in the spring, and not to worry about bulb foliage going amongst perennials and then having to cut back the perennial with the bulb foliage in it. So it just seems to be cleaner and make it a little simpler for our large-scale operation. So once you know what you want to plant and where you want to plant it, the thing to think about is how deep does it go. Typically a bulb is planted about 2 to 3 times deep as the bulb is wide. So these daffodils are about 2 inches wide, so we want to plant them about 6 inches deep. So you can use a soil knife to plant, like this, and just kind of knife in the soil, a trowel. Bulb planters will work too. We pretty much like these knives for weeding, for planting and all that, and they're really solidly made and do a great job. So, and they also have those marks, the measuring marks, so you know how deep to go. So when you put the bulb in the hole, we put them root side down, but sometimes when we're doing bouquets where we just plop a bunch in there, it doesn't really matter, honestly. They've done studies and we've done a little experiment out here, and you can put it sideways, you can even put it upside down, this way, that way, whichever way you want. It doesn't really matter. And then you just make sure that there's contact with the roots to the soil, so that is one thing. You don't want to air pocket, the root will desiccate and dry. And then fill it back up and you're good to go. The next step to do would be to water the ground. The bulb has to take in moisture to start growing. It actually puts down roots in the fall. That's what it's doing, is growing roots. And then throughout the winter, a plant growth regulator goes and it makes it start growing in the spring, but we won't get into all that. The other thing we do here at the garden is we put down Milorganite on the ground after we water. And we do that more as an animal deterrent than for fertilizer, because in fact a bulb, if you dissect it, it has a flower bud already in it, a flower in it. It's really small, it has leaves already formed. These scales are the carbohydrates that it needs to grow, so it has everything it needs right here to flower. You do not need to fertilize in the fall. That's a myth that you need to use bone meal or whatever. You don't have to do that. We just use this as an animal deterrent. If you do want to fertilize, you would really only need to do that if your bulbs start to not produce flowers, which means they don't have enough energy. So you would do that actually in the spring when the foliage starts dying back down. You deadhead your bulb. We typically do that just to keep them from putting energy into seed, and then you would fertilize then. We don't fertilize any of our bulbs out here really, so you don't need to do that. It's unnecessary. The other thing to think about with the bulbs is, especially tulip bulbs, animals tend to like and dig up. So besides the Milorganite, you'd also want to clean up the tunics, the outside of anything that might let an animal know you planted there. And then we spray the ground with liquid fence after we've planted every week until the ground freezes. And then in the spring we spray the tulip bulbs with liquid fence, the foliage, every week through their bloom time to keep animals from eating them. If you don't want to go through all that hassle, you could switch to just using daffodils, muscaria, and other bulbs that are pretty critter environment resistant. They tend not to eat those, so those would be the ones to use if you have those kind of issues and don't want to go through all that extra expense and work. Instead, come out to the Green Bay Botanical Garden, because you'll see all these beautiful tulips. One other quick thing is a small miscellaneous bulb like this, once again, 2 to 3 times deep, can only be a couple inches on this. And a lot of people will plant muscaria, grape hyacinth, as a marker plant because the foliage comes up in the fall. So it will mark where their bulbs are from the previous year, so they don't have to worry about nicking them up when they plant again in the fall, the previous or the next year. And then you could also lasagna style this, where you plant this guy first in the hole, the daffodil, cover it up part way, and then put the muscaria on top. And then you would have 2 things in blooming at the same time approximately, if the times are right and in the same area. One other point is, if you have a ton of bulbs you're going to plant, like here at the Botanical Garden, we're going to be planting 30,000 bulbs this fall. So we'll use a drill with an auger. You want to make sure it's electrical because it'll take a lot of energy to be augering into the ground. So once again, think about coming out here in the spring to see our bloomers. They'll be blooming, you know, May, pretty much we try to time it mid-May, but they'll be blooming sporadically, depends on the weather. So definitely May is a great time to come out to see our 30,000 new bulbs, plus our probably over 250,000 bulbs that already exist in the ground. So that's bulbs 101. Plant some, enjoy some, go out there, garden. That's the tip of the day.